Good morning. Are we well? Oh, come on, you can respond. Are we well? Are we well online? Go ahead, drop your favorite vibey emoji in the chat. It's so good to be with you this morning. If you have a Bible with you, would you like to turn with me to Matthew chapter 25? We're going to be reading from Matthew chapter 25 together, kicking off in verse 31. The Bible says this: when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger, invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Then he'll say to those on the left, "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me." They also will answer, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you?" He will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. And this morning, I want us to look at the subject, how to respond to injustice. Show of hands, how many of you would say you're not a particularly competitive person? You're not really that competitive. Double hands up over here. Show of hands. Okay. And show of hands, who would say they are quite competitive? Competitive people. Look at the... Wow, that's it. Look at the hands gone. My people. I'm quite a competitive person. I can be quite competitive. I think it started when I was young, when I was a kid. Growing up, I always wanted to be a musician. My dad's from India. You'll know my mum is from Sri Lanka. And growing up, I was born in Tooting in southwest London. And they gave me my first instrument when I was about 3 years old. And that competitive streak and that musicianship started growing. And when I was about 6 years old, I think we have a photo of roughly what I looked like at this time. This competitive streak, don't be fooled by the smile. This competitive streak and this musicianship collided when they announced in school that they were opening auditions for the solo at the big Christmas Carol concert. And I knew this was my time to shine. I knew this would go down among the greats. Stormzy at Glastonbury, Beyonce at Coachella, Ryan Rodrigues at St. Boniface RC Primary School in Tooting's Christmas concert in 2002. This was my chance. And actually, I'm not going to blame my teachers, but they even suggested to me that we all knew what was going to happen. I remember my teacher in year 2, Miss Peters, come alongside me. She said, "Ryan, we really want you to audition for the Carol concert." And you know, she had a way of saying it. There might have even been like a wink involved. I don't think I can wink, but she was winking. "We really want you to encourage." And we all knew what was happening. And so I auditioned for the solo at the school Christmas Carol concert. And they reduced it from the, in my head, thousands, in real life, more like 20 people who auditioned for the solo. And they whittled it down. And they said, we've cut it down to a final three people who are in contention for the solo at the big Christmas concert. One of them was me. I made the top 3. The other 2, we'll call them Tom and Ollie, because that was their names. And they said, "But you know what? It's been such a close contest this year. It's been a really hard contest that we can't make our decision. We need more days. We'll announce on Friday the result of who's going to get the solo spot." And so Monday came and went, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Friday comes, Friday morning. Let me tell you, there has never been so much swagger in all of Tooting's history as I had walking through the gates of school that Friday morning, thinking I was going to be announced as the soloist of the school Christmas contest. And they said, it has been such a difficult year. We've made our decision. And it's been so difficult. We're going to change the rules this year. We're not going to have a solo. We're going to have a duet. There's going to be 2 people chosen. And the 2 we've chosen for the big solo at the school Christmas concert is Tom and Ollie. I felt like I've been robbed. I felt like I'd been lied to by my teachers. I felt like I'd been cheated. I felt like I'd been the victim of an injustice. And obviously it's 20 years later and I'm doing much better and I've healed and I've processed. But thank you, Elizabeth, I appreciate that. But obviously there are more serious examples of injustice in the world around us. Even this week, COP26, yesterday was announced as a day of global action against climate injustice. Over 100,000 protesters gathered in Glasgow, with protests in over 100 countries around the world. Injustice is in the headlines. You would have seen them. Even this week, racism, sexism, the list goes on. The question we're faced is, how do we in 2021 respond to the injustices we see in the world? And the first thing I want us to look at this morning is the priority of justice. Everyone say priority. Priority of justice. Type that in the chat. Priority of justice. The Bible says this in Matthew 25, verse 31, which we looked at already. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. This passage in Matthew 25 is towards the end of Jesus' teaching in the Gospel of Matthew. And Jesus is teaching on what the kingdom of God will look like. It's an upside down kingdom that we've been looking at over the last couple of weeks. And Jesus is trying to correct some attitudes that they had about the kingdom and the promised king, the Messiah, the anointed one. And Jesus is teaching what the kingdom will really look like. They thought that the Messiah, the king of this kingdom, will be one of military force and dominance. And he's saying, no, you've got it wrong. And he starts to tell these stories and these parables. And he eventually gets to the verses we read in Matthew 25, when he's talking about the day of judgment, when the sheep and the goats will be separated. And what is the one defining characteristic Jesus says will separate these sheep and the goats? He says it's how you respond to the least of these. It's how you respond to those unseen, those on the margins, those who have been oppressed, those who have been wronged. Justice is a priority for God. And actually, the word for justice, throughout the Bible, the theme of justice is woven through. And often you'll see this couplet of justice and righteousness. You'll see it throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. And that word that they both kind of stem from is the word mishpat in Hebrew. And mishpat, the word that we translate as justice, is used over 400 times in the Old Testament. But it is so much more deep than, I guess, the way we would use justice in 2021. Often when we say justice, we can mean punishment. We can mean retribution, correction. That's actually only a narrow interpretation of the word mishpat. Of the 400, about 10% refer to that kind of justice. But the other 90% refer to something different. It's not retribution, but it's restoration. It's the deliberate actions of coming alongside the vulnerable, challenging systems of oppressions and unjust structures in society and working to correct injustices. That is the work of justice that we see woven throughout the Bible. And you'll see it in Amos chapter 5. We read that let justice roll on like a river. That word is mishpat, righteousness. There's the couplet, like a never failing stream. In Micah, we read, what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, mishpat, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And in the verses that Jesus reads as his announcing manifesto in Luke's gospel, quoting Isaiah 61, which we read, the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me to preach good news to the poor, the least, the last, the lost, the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives. It goes on to say in verse 6 of Isaiah 61, "For I, the Lord, love justice," mishpat. Justice is a priority in the kingdom of God. And as Jesus is teaching about what the kingdom will look like, he is saying justice is part of God's core. Justice is part of God's heart. God longs for us to play our part in partnering with him as agents of correcting injustice, coming alongside the vulnerable, the least, the last, and the lost. That's the priority of justice in the Bible. But the second thing I want us to look at is this. It's the paradox of justice. Everyone say paradox. Paradox. Paradox means contradiction, things that you think wouldn't align, but actually do. And in the verses we read, we continue in verse 34 to see, "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, you invited me in. I needed clothes, you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me.'" You know, we're busy people in 2021. I found an article this week that said, over the course of our lifetime, the average British worker will spend around 3,507 days of their life at work. That works out at roughly 84,171 hours in the course of our career. During that time, the typical employee will also experience approximately 6 office romances, 812 workplace arguments, as well as brewing around 7,967 pots of coffee. We're busy people. There's a lot going on in our life. And if you're anything like me, when we read verses like the verses we've just read, it can feel like it's setting a high standard that, if I'm honest, I don't know if I could ever live up to. We're too busy. There's so much competing for our attention. And if we're not careful, we can actually become immune to the stories of injustice in the world. And our heart begins to harden. How could I have the time and energy to focus on someone else? I'm worried about hustling and grinding and making my way to the top of the ladder, vying for power and influence. But this is the paradox of the kingdom of God. And Jesus, as he's teaching, he tells his followers, the way to the top is the way down low. If you want to be the first, you have to be the last. It is about service. That's the kingdom of God. The first will be last. Jesus identifies with the least and the lost. That's the paradox. In losing ourselves in service of others, we find ourselves. It's the paradox of justice. And it can be easy to hear those verses and think, are you saying, Ryan, then, that that's why God loves us? Because we do good works. Because we do good deeds. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Jesus loves you because he loves you. And he died on a cross for you. God's love and our salvation is guaranteed not by what we do, but what by God has done for us through Jesus on the cross. So these good works, correcting injustice, is not the root of God's love for us. It's not the root of our salvation. But it's the fruit of a life lived, of the overflow of that love. That is the paradox of justice in the world. It is a love that is selfless. It is a love that serves and gives away, knowing that we have received everything through the love of Jesus. Justice isn't peripheral to the gospel. Justice, pursuing righteousness, pursuing and correcting systems of oppression and injustice in the world, are central to God's understanding of the kingdom of God. And those verses that we looked at, you're sick, in prison, clothing me, they refer to what scholars call the quartet of the vulnerable. And it's a motif that runs throughout the Bible. The quartet of the vulnerable is the poor, the foreigner, the widow, and the orphan. And rather than being an exclusive list, that list comes to represent all injustice, all oppression. And I don't know what it might be for you in 2021, that maybe your heart longs to see justice in the world. As you see the injustice around you, it might be racism or sexism or ableism or poverty or climate change. The list goes on. but it's a priority for God, and it's part of this upside down kingdom. It's a priority, it's a paradox, but it's also the power of justice. The power of justice. In verse 37, we read, "Then the righteous," there's that couplet, "then the righteous will ask him, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?' The king will reply, 'Truly I tell you, whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me.'" You know, I wish Jesus would have said in those verses, "Whatever you did to the least, whatever you did to the oppressed, those who are hurting, it's as if you did for me." I wish Jesus would have said, because that would have made my life so much easier. But what Jesus says is, whatever you do to the least of these, you do to me. The power of working as agents of justice in this world is that Jesus himself identifies with the least, the poor, the broken, the hurting. Whatever you do to these, that you do to me. There is power when we partner with God in his plan for restoration. I want to spend all my time encountering Jesus, receiving God's love day after day. And this passage is clear. If you want to meet with Jesus, surround yourself with the poor, the hurting, the vulnerable, and in service, you encounter the person of Jesus. But I think sometimes it can be easy to be overwhelmed by the stories of injustice in the world. I didn't grow up believing in God. I became a Christian at university when friends of mine shared their faith in Jesus. And before that time, if I'm honest, I didn't really have much radar for injustice in the world. It wasn't that I hadn't experienced any, I hadn't seen it, I didn't clock it. But actually, after friends of mine prayed for me to be filled with the Spirit of God, I began to, suddenly as if my eyes were open to the injustices of the world around me. But that actually made me feel less hopeful than I did before. I didn't know how God could work. And it was personal to me as well. As the parent of immigrants, I had experienced racism and seen injustice around me. And if I'm honest, I began to feel hopeless. But it was through reading the pages of the Bible, through reading verses like the verses that we've read today, that filled me with hope for God's vision of justice. And it was also by reading about the lives of Christians, women and men throughout the ages, who've played their part in God's healing, redemptive, justice work that began to lift my spirits. I remember reading about Martin Luther King in school. I knew about the works he had done. He won the Nobel Peace Prize. He won the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He was core to the introduction of the Civil Rights Act in America, in segregated America. He had worked tirelessly to combat injustice. But I didn't know that it was his Christian faith that underpinned all of that work. I didn't know in the speech that we often hear about, I have a dream, that towards the end of that speech, he went on to quote the verses we looked at earlier. "Let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-ending stream." One of the most iconic speeches has the gospel message right at the heart of it. I didn't know how his faith in Jesus underpinned how he saw the world. And I remember coming across this quote from Martin Luther King: "Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental. But power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love." It was reading stories like this that I began to get filled with hope. And it might not be that we're called to emulate Martin Luther King, but it's in partnering with God in his work for justice. Justice is coming alongside those who are hurting, and that's something that we can all do. We can all, this week, partner with God in fighting structures of injustice. It might be in the workplace. It might be calling out racism or sexism. It might be by serving on the Love Christmas campaign and packing boxes that are going to the refugees who have arrived in this community. It might be serving at the shelter along the homeless. It might be inviting people to the table who haven't had a voice, giving voice to the voiceless. But we can each play a part in taking those steps to partner with God in what he's doing. And it strikes me that every time we do one of these little acts, every time you correct injustice, every time you serve, every time you welcome those who've been unwelcomed, you see the unseen in the world. We're not simply doing good deeds, but rather we are partnering with God himself in his vision for healing, reconciliation, and bringing justice to a world full of injustice. Because let me tell you, there is no more vision for justice more compelling, no life lived more beautiful than the life of Jesus. Jesus is God's response to injustice. Jesus, who was born as a Jewish boy in Roman-occupied Palestine. He was born into an oppressed people, a colonized people. Jesus, who lived his life out of the overflow of knowing who God had called him to be and his identity as a much-loved son of God, serving those, the least, the last, and the lost, those who are hurting, those on the outside, those on the margins. Jesus, who lived the life that we couldn't have lived, but Jesus, who took all of the mess in our world, the pain, all of the suffering and our hurt, and died the death that we ought to have died. He took that all on himself, but he rose again, giving the victory over death and injustice. Jesus, the risen, victorious King, is moving in our world, and his spirit that moves to heal, to restore, and to bring justice is working today. And God is inviting us to partner with him. Imagine what our world could look like as the people of God, filled with the Spirit of God, go out into a world that is hurting, into a world that is wounded by little actions and big actions, taking our place with God. Imagine what that would look like for our society. Imagine what that would look like in our workplaces, in our families, in our universities. Imagine what that would look like in our city, in this nation, and in this world. In Jesus' name, amen.